Chapter 2. Don Thumb's mysterious directions. Bulger and I set out for Petersburg, and thence proceed to Archangel. The story of our journey as far as Ilitch on the Ilitch. Ivan the Teamster. How we made our way northward in search of the portals to the world within a world. Ivan's fret. Bulger's distrust of the man and other things. According to the learned Don Thumb's manuscript, the portals to the world within a world were situated somewhere in northern Russia, possibly, so he thought, from all indications, somewhere on the westerly slope of the upper Urals, but the great thinker could not locate them with any accuracy. The people will tell thee was the mysterious phrase that occurred again and again on the mildewed pages of this wonderful writing. The people will tell thee. Ah, but what people will be learned enough to tell me that? Was the brain-racking question which I asked myself, sleeping and waking, at sunrise, at high noon, and at sunset, at the crowing of the cock, and in the silent hours of the night. The people will tell thee, said learned Don Thumb. Ah, but what people will tell me where to find the portals to the world within a world? Hitherto on my travels I had made choice of a semi-oriental garb, both on account of its picturesqueness and its lightness and warmth. But now, as I was about to pass quite across Russia for a number of months, I resolved to don the Russian national costume. For speaking Russian fluently, as I did a score or more of languages living and dead, I would thus be enabled to come and go without everlastingly displaying my passport, or having my trains of thought constantly disturbed by inquisitive travelling companions. A very important thing to me, for my mind possessed the extraordinary power of working out automatically any task assigned to it by me, provided it was not suddenly thrown off its track by some ridiculous interruption. For instance, I was upon the very point one day of discovering perpetual motion, when the gracious Baroness suddenly opened the door and asked me whether I had pared the nails of my great toes lately, as she had observed that I had worn holes in several pairs of my best stockings. It was about the middle of February when I set out from the Castle Trump, and I journeyed night and day in order to reach Petersburg by the 1st of March, for I knew that the government trains would leave that city for the White Sea during the first week of that month. Bulger and I were both in the best of health and spirits, and the fatigue of the journey didn't tell upon us in the least. The moment I arrived at the Russian capital, I applied to the Emperor for permission to join one of the government trains, which was most graciously accorded. Our route lay almost directly to the northward for several days, at the end of which time we reached the shores of Lake Ladoga. This we crossed on the ice with our sledges, as a few days later we did Lake Wonga. Thence by land again, we kept on our way until Wonga Bay had been reached, crossing it too on the ice, and so reaching the station of the same name, where we halted for a day to give our horses a well-deserved rest. From this point, we proceeded in a straight line over the snowfields to Archangel, an important trading post on the White Sea. As this was the destination of the government train, I parted with its commandant after a few days' pleasant sojourn at the government house, and set out, attended only by my faithful Bulger and 2 servants, who had been assigned to me by the Imperial Commission. My course now carried me up the river Dwina as far as Solvichegodsk. Thence I proceeded on my way over the frozen waters of the Wichita River until we had reached the government post of Urens, and from here on we headed due east until our hardy little horses had dragged us into the picturesque village of Ilitch on the Ilitch. Here we were obliged to abandon our sledges, for the snows had disappeared like magic, uncovering long vistas of green fields, which in a few days the May sun dotted with flowers and sweet shrubs. At Ilitch I was obliged to relinquish from my service the 2 faithful government retainers who had accompanied me from Archangel, for they had now reached the most westerly point which they had been commissioned to visit. I had become very much attached to them, and so had Bulger, and after their departure we both felt as if we were now, for the first time, among strangers in a strange land. But I succeeded in engaging, as I thought, a trustworthy teamster, Ivan by name, who made a contract with me for a goodly wage to carry me 100 miles farther north. But not another step farther, little Baron, said the fellow doggedly. I was now really at the foothills of the northern Urals, for the rocky crests and snow-clad peaks were in full sight. I turned many a wistful look up toward the wild regions shut in by their sheer walls and parapets, shaggy and bristling with black pines, for a low, mysterious voice came whispering in my inward ear that somewhere in that awful wilderness, I should one day come upon the portals of the world within a world. In spite of all I could do, Bulger took a violent dislike to Ivan and Ivan to him. And if the bargain had not been made and the money paid over, I should have looked about me for another teamster. And yet it would have been a foolish thing to do, for Ivan had 2 excellent horses, as I saw at a glance, and, what's more, he took the best of care of them, at every post rubbing them until they were quite dry, and never thinking of his own supper until they had been watered and fed. His tarantass, too, was quite new and solidly built, and well furnished with soft blankets, all in all as comfortable as you can make a wagon which has no other springs than the 2 long wooden supports that reach from axle to axle. True, they were somewhat elastic, but I could notice that Bulger was not over fond of riding in this curious vehicle with its rattle-te-bang gait up and down these mountain roads, and often asked permission to leap out and follow on foot. At length Ivan reported everything in readiness for the start, and although I would have fain taken my departure from Ilitch on the Ilitch in as quiet a manner as possible, yet the whole village turned out to see us off, Ivan's family, father, mother, sisters and brothers, wife and children, uncles and aunts and cousins by dozens alone, making up people enough to stock a small town. They cheered and waved their kerchiefs, Bulger barked, and I smiled and raised my cap with all the dignity of a trump. And so we got away at last from Ilitch on the Ilitch, Ivan on the box, and Bulger and I at the back, sitting close together like 2 brothers that we were, 2 breasts with but a single heart-beat, and 2 brains busy with the same thought, that come perils or come sudden attacks, come covert danger or bold and open-faced onslaught, we should stand together and fall together. Many and many a time as Ivan's horses went crawling up the long stretches of mountain road, and I lay stretched upon the broad cushioned seat of the tarantass with a blanket rolled up for a pillow, I would find myself unconsciously repeating those mysterious words of Don Fum. The people will tell thee. The people will tell thee. So steep were the roads that some days we would not make more than 5 miles, and on others a halt of several hours would have to be made to enable Ivan to tighten his horse's shoes, grease the axles, or do some needful thing in or about his wagon. It was slow work. Aye, it was very slow and tedious, but what matters it how many or great the difficulties, to a man who has made up his mind to accomplish a certain task? Do the storks or the wild geese stop to count the thousands of miles between them and their faraway homes when the time comes to turn their heads southward? Do the brown ants pause to count the hundreds of thousands of grains of sand which they must carry through their long corridors and winding passages before they have burrowed deep enough to escape the frost of midwinter? There had been many trumps, but never one that had thrown up his arms and cried, "I surrender." And should I be the first to do it? Never, not even if it meant never to see dear old Castle Trump again. One morning, as we went zigzagging up a particularly nasty bit of mountain road, Ivan suddenly wheeled about, and without even taking off his hat, cried out, "Little Baron, I cover the last mile of the 100 today. If thou wouldst go any farther north, thou must hire thee another teamster. Dost hear?" "Silence," said I sternly, for the fellow had broken in upon a very important train of thought. Bulger, too, resented the man's insolence, and growled and showed his teeth. "But, little Baron, listen to reason," he continued in a more respectful tone, removing his cap. "My people will expect me back. I promised my father. I'm a dutiful son. Nay, Ivan," I interrupted sharply, "curb that tongue of thine, lest it harm thy soul. Know then that I spoke with thy father, and he promised me that thou shouldst go a second 100 miles with me if need were. but on condition that I give thee double pay. It shall be done, and on top of that a goodly present for your Golubchika, darling. Little Baron, thou art a hard master, whimpered the man. If the whim took thee thou wouldst bid me leap into the giant's well, just to see whether it has a bottom or not. St. Nicholas to save me. Nay, Ivan, said I kindly, I know no such word as cruelty, although I do confess that right seems harsh at times. But thou wert born to serve and I to command. Providence hath made thee poor and me rich. We need each other. Do thou thy duty, and thou wilt find me just and considerate. Disobey me, and thou wilt find that this short arm may be stretched from Ilitch to Petersburg. Ivan turned pale at this hidden threat of mine, but I deemed it necessary to make it, for I as well as Bulger had scented treachery and rebellion about this boorish fellow, whose good trait was his love of his horses, and it has always been my rule in life to open my eyes wide to the good that there is in a man, and close them to his faults. But, in spite of kind words and kind treatment, Ivan grew surlier and moodier the moment we had passed the 100th milestone. Bulger watched him with a gaze so steady and thoughtful that the man fairly quailed before it. Hour by hour he became more and more restive, and upon leaving a roadside tavern, for the very first time since we had left Ilitch on the Ilitch, I noticed that the fellow had been drinking too much kvass. He let loose his tongue, and raised his hand against his horses, which until that moment he had been wont to load down with caresses and pet names. Look out for that driver of thine, little Baron, whispered the tavern-keeper. He's in a reckless mood. He'd not pull up if the giant's well were gaping in front of him. St. Nicholas have thee in his safe keeping.